The Denver Broncos made an unorthodox move, signing a UFL star defensive lineman to a 3-year contract. We'll tell you why Dondrea Tillman has an opportunity to make the Broncos 53-man roster on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you once again to everybody in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there, for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. Training camp is right around the corner, and that means we're going to have you covered even further here as the season builds up and gets a little bit closer. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, obviously a little bit of an unorthodox move as the Broncos are in that lull period as we end the mandatory minicamp. We're in the waiting period before you get to the start of training camp, which we know for rookies, they're going to report on July 17th. Veterans are going to report on July 23rd. But that wasn't why there was, something weird going on. The Broncos made a roster move where they were planning on adding, it's expected to become official here on Thursday, Dondrea Tillman, defensive lineman from the Birmingham Stallions, obviously a 3-time back-to-back Birmingham Stallions, previously of the USFL, the UFL, now the United Football League here. Adding him to the roster, very, very interesting move here. And I know, like for me, Sarah, I didn't watch a lot of the UFL this season. I just, like I said, everything's been going on. Like you had mini camp going on when the championship games were, everything was just in flux here with this league. And I love the fact that the NFL now is pulling guys from this league. But Dondrea Tillman was a guy that I did see several times in terms of people talking about on Twitter when talking about the UFL. How come this guy's not on an NFL roster? Like he should be on an NFL roster this upcoming season. Well, now that has come to fruition. He's going to be on the Denver Broncos, a 3-year deal worth $2.84 million and a $10,000 signing bonus.
It's kind of fitting because he put in 3 years with the Stallions. I mean, he's been there for a long time, and he was a high draft pick for them once upon a time, and certainly somebody who flew under the radar in the NFL draft process, Cody. I believe Indiana University of Pennsylvania or something like that. I mean, this guy is off the radar completely, and so it's great that there's been a developmental league. I guess you can't necessarily call it a developmental league because that's not officially what it is. It's a showcase league for the NFL. So the NFL needs a developmental league, by the way, but it's kind of fitting that he would sign a 3-year deal in Denver after spending the last 3 years applying a ton of pressure for the Stallions, which is another kind of cool connection there. He's already used to wearing a horse on his head. He's got it all figured out at this point, but he's been one of the highest graded defenders according to Pro Football Focus and people who actually do watch all the UFL games, because Cody, I'm like you. I mean, I see sometimes guys getting talked about or big plays or big wins, things like that. I don't really watch the UFL. So we've gotten a chance now to dive into some highlights for Dondrea Tillman, and this guy can play. I mean, 46 quarterback hurries, 6 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. The Broncos obviously like this guy, and a general manager's job or roster builders around the league, their job is never done, and they never sleep, basically, right? They don't leave any stone unturned. So if a guy is playing well enough to potentially play in the NFL, you are going to get recognized by the NFL. And a lot of UFL guys just got signed by NFL teams now that their season is over. But Tillman feels like one of the biggest, I guess, if you want to call him one of the bigger catches of this maybe kind of mini little free agency period that's gone on here.
Well, and a lot of people have deemed him as one of the bigger stars of the UFL. And look, I think to your point, right, about the NFL needing a developmental league, we've seen, like in the past, like the Broncos have had some success with bringing in guys from like old leagues like the AAF. Remember, Devontae Bosby got brought in, didn't stay long with the team, but Mike Purcell was a guy who was on the AAF, really kind of on his last job, and then he ended up signing an extension with the Broncos. And so you do see, I think there is some benefit here, and maybe one day, Sarah, maybe one day the UFL, maybe that can be a platform here where the NFL's like, all right, hey, this is what we need to do. Maybe they can come with an agreement. Like guys at the end of the year of an NFL team that are on the practice squad, maybe they can go play in the spring a little bit, get some more tape on them, because several guys have signed NFL contracts. I know there was that one kicker who is now on 60-yard field goals all season in the UFL. He landed on an NFL roster. Now you add Tillman to the mix here. He's a bigger defender now. I know our good friend Mike Kliss kind of designated him as an outside linebacker. Sayre, when I look at him in the UFL, and granted, it's a little bit different, but there's a lot of former NFL guys there and a lot of former big-name college players. I look at his body type, and I don't necessarily see outside linebacker. I more so see a guy who can play defensive end here, right? Because you look at Zach Allen, you look at John Franklin Myers, those body types that they have there. I'm like, he looks a little bit more suited to play that, but I don't think not only can he play defensive end, I think he can play a little bit of D end, D tackle. You can have him play the 3 tech. You can have him play a 4-eye. You can have him play a 5, but you can also have him play a 1 tech. It's evident from what you've seen. And obviously his coach, Skip Holtz, had a lot of great things to say about him as well. So for me, this is an under the radar signing. 3 years, definitely interesting dynamics. In your opinion, does a 3-year deal at this juncture mean that his 53-man roster spot is pretty much secure at this point?
I think it raises a really interesting question, because I know, like, the kicker that you mentioned who signed with Detroit and had competition to sign him, like, he was arguably maybe with the kicking situations across the league right now, he was maybe arguably the top prize out of the number of teams I saw that were going after him, like the Packers even, who already have 2 or 3 kickers trying to sign him. The Detroit Lions get him. I think he signed a 2-year deal. And so just an interesting, I know somebody on my Twitter, I can't remember who responded to me, said, well, it seems like a standard undrafted free agent contract. And to me, Cody, I don't think I've ever really seen a guy that's coming up from the UFL, the XFL, the AAF, any of these defunct leagues. I've never seen anybody sign a 3-year contract. And so anybody in the comments who may pay closer attention to that can call me out if I'm wrong on that, but I don't recall any time that's happened. So to me, that indicates that the Broncos are serious about having this guy around, and it indicates that, I know he didn't get a big signing bonus, 10,000, right? Which is, I mean, undrafted rookies get huge guarantees on their contract, whether it's 150,000 and then a signing bonus on top of it. So I get that aspect of it, but a 3-year deal, normally these guys are getting 1-year shots and say, hey, come to training camp on a non-guaranteed deal. So I think it's a perspective shift of looking at this as man, the Broncos gave him a 3-year deal. Why would they do that? Remember when they gave Alexander Johnson a multi-year deal after the dude hadn't played football in years? And everybody's like, wait, what the heck? Why is he getting a 2-year contract? The team and the scouting department really liked him, and he ended up starting a lot of games. So I feel like this is one of those kind of moves that's like, okay, you can kind of sleep on it at your own risk.
Well, and we'll tell you this as well, like a 3-year deal for a guy who had to get released from his UFL contract in order for the move to become official. Like that's what the UFL, formerly the XFL, that's what they want for their players, right? They want a pipeline from that to the NFL, guys to get second chances, because if you're not playing, how do you expect the phone to get picked up and say, hey, we know you're a street free agent, want to see you? Like, keep playing football, keep ingrained in it. Tillman is a guy who's put his head down. He's worked really hard. And so obviously a 3-year deal speaks volumes about maybe how the Broncos view him in terms of maybe in 2024, but maybe even beyond 2024. And we'll tell you what his place in the rotation will be this upcoming season if it pans out the way that we believe it will. On today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and even easier. Prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer that it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So make sure if you got friends or family coming into town, you happen to live in Denver, take them to go see a Rockies game at Coors Field. Now, even though the Rockies have their ups and downs, the atmosphere at Coors Field is always fun. It's always a good time, and tickets are always reliably low. And last-minute deals where you can save up to 60% off of buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Dondrea Tillman is going to be a pressure player for the Denver Broncos, but where's he going to line up? Is he going to be an outside linebacker like some are saying? Is he going to play defensive line, which maybe Cody and I kind of think that's where he's going to end up for the Denver Broncos in 2024. We're going to talk about more of what his role could look like, who else could play hybrid roles, and maybe some other factors here for the Denver Broncos front seven on today's episode Locked On Broncos. But want to say thank you to every single one of you out there that's an everyday listener of Locked On Broncos, making us your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And you can always find us free and available everywhere that you listen to your podcast, as well as you can jump over to YouTube, and you should, if you haven't already, and hit subscribe over there. Get us into the algorithm, because we have fresh Denver Broncos content coming at you all off season long. And you know what else? You can find localized coverage from experts that know the teams they're talking about on the Locked On Sports Today show, which is streaming 24/7 on YouTube at all times. I mean, you can find the biggest stories, can't miss analysis, opinions, news from people who cover these teams every single day from the experts of the Locked On Sports Network for free, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So jump right and do that today. You want to get on top of that so you have all your offseason coverage taken care of. Cody, let's talk about Dondrea Tillman some more, because I know it's June. I know that people, they may kind of, just kind of shrug this off as like, it's June. We're looking for things to talk about and things like that. But this is kind of unprecedented as far as, the Broncos are concerned. They've signed guys from, previous professional leagues in the past. They've taken shots on players. I think they did so last year. I mean, they've looked at CFL guys. They've looked at XFL, UFL. They've done all this before. This guy seems really interesting to me because of the fact that, we have outlets like Pro Football Focus grading his play. This is a high level of professional football. What do you think about his potential as an outside linebacker, though? I know you touched on it in the first segment. Body type wise, doesn't necessarily seem to be the fit for him at the NFL level.
Yeah, that's the concern that I had when we're talking about maybe outside linebacker versus defensive end. You look at the thumbnail on our YouTube video. If people see that, if you go back and you watch him play, like I shared a couple of clips on my social media feed on Twitter. He's a big guy, and look, he plays with a high motor, Sayre, and I like that about him. But is that what you need for an outside linebacker? Right now, Sayre, let's look at the Broncos 4 deep at that position, right? Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning, Nick Bonito, and obviously Jonah Ellis, who we just highlighted in an episode of Locked On Broncos just the other day here. To me, I like that, right? So for me, I look at his body type. I look at where Denver's already at an outside linebacker, them giving a 3-year deal to a guy who was a UFL star, not necessarily a pass rusher. Now, look, the quarterback carries 42 of them. That's impressive, and especially in 10 games of play. 3.5 sacks there, but he's a guy I think is a better run stopper than anything. And what was a major emphasis from George Payton, Sean Payton this offseason defensively? They said, we need to figure out how to stop the run. We have to be better there. And that's going to free up your outside linebackers and edge rushers to make plays. I don't necessarily think that is Dondrea Tillman's game necessarily, as being that guy on the outside that can line up as an edge rusher and then go do the things. I think he could do those things if you want to. I think he's more of a power rusher, right? Maybe like a Max Crosby style. And I'm not trying to compare him to Max Crosby. I'm just trying to say, like, in terms of body type, that might be what you get. But that's more prototypical defensive end. I know Denver's running a 3-4 defense, but you have to have guys that can fit that mold there and anchor down. So let's take a look here where I think we even talked about it. The best fit for him is that defensive end, in my opinion, a guy who can play D-end, D-tackle. Who are the starters for the Broncos defensive line right now? We anticipate John Franklin Myers. That's a pretty dang good starter right there. DJ Jones at nose tackle, or he could also play the defensive end position. And then you also have a multitude of other guys factoring into the rotation here. Zach Allen's obviously going to be the other starter there, but you've got guys like Elijah Garcia. You've got Matt Henningsen, who's going to be in a very interesting year. Veteran Angelo Blackson, who is a standout during Broncos OTAs and minicamp. And then, if I'm not mistaken, I think, who else did I miss on that? There's Ronnie Perkins. Ronnie Perkins is still on this team as well. Darrell Chami kind of plays a little bit more of that outside linebacker there. I don't necessarily think that's where Tillman is going to be. So for me, what do the Broncos want to do? Like, for them to give him a 3-year contract at this point, you already have your starters in place. You need good rotational guys. And maybe if Tillman doesn't rotate in right away, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? To me, a 3-year deal says we view this guy as a guy who can play for us, but we're going to develop him, right? You don't give a 3-year deal to a guy who was just playing in the UFL, hasn't played in the NFL, and you're just saying, all right, we're confident that this guy's going to be something. You have to put the time in. You have to, water the garden, so to speak, if we're making a developmental growing analogy here. That's what I think the Broncos' plan is. And we have to also understand the identity, according to Zach Allen, on this defensive line under Jamar Cain is going to be more attacking than it was under Marcus Dixon. So that's a whole nother dynamic. And when I watch Tillman, I watch his highlights, I watch plays that he's made, he represents attacking to a T.
He does, and he's able to use his length really, really well. Like you said, when he's setting the edge against the run, playing that defensive end position, the length really stands out. A lot of batted passes with the UFL. I'm trying to find the exact number because I know somebody had posted it, Cody. But he had a lot of batted passes, a lot of tackles for loss, a lot of pressures, and he's doing that with his hand in the dirt, right? And you mentioned it, the Broncos at the edge. When you think about the guys that they have at that position group, the way it's constructed right now, it's a lot of lighter guys who are really fast, really explosive, got pretty good length, but they're not necessarily, how the Baltimore Ravens typically build their edge guys and the New England Patriots, guys like that. Those guys are more of like the traditional defensive ends who then will stand up. The Pittsburgh Steelers have done a lot of that in the past. It's not necessarily like that now in the NFL. You have to have guys that are position versatile all over the place. And so I think this is a guy that, as opposed to him playing outside in terms of his versatility, he's somebody that I would say you play him on the D line and maybe kick him out in certain instances if you have certain packages, right? And so I don't necessarily think that's his game is playing on the outside. You want him to use that length and physicality and effort from the interior defensive line positions. I don't know who he'd play over at outside linebacker right now. I mean, if the Broncos are fully healthy, Baron Browning, Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, Jonah Ellis, those guys all need to be on the field. And so to me, the defensive line is where you have some openings, right? It's where you want to keep guys fresh. If a defensive lineman is playing 55% of the snaps and being able to be effective in a rotation, like that's a huge win for your defensive coordinator, for your pass rush coaches, for defensive line coach Jamar Cain. You want those guys to be staying fresh and being able to be effective on a per snap basis, as opposed to just throwing guys out there and saying, well, we only got 3 good ones. They've got to play 70-75%. When you look at the defensive lines that are really good around the NFL, look at Cleveland. I mean, they're kind of a outlier example right now, but they've got 8-9 guys on that. Green Bay is another one. They rotate guys, they keep them fresh. They're able to put guys in positions where they can weaponize Myles Garrett as a nose tackle. You see that happen all the time. They just drafted Mike Hall out of Ohio State. He's going to play all over that defensive front. You want guys like this that can come in and give you options when you're trying to scheme against certain teams.
Well, and I think if we're going on the theme of what you require defensively in today's NFL, we've talked about it with the secondary, the positional versatility. I think maybe inside linebacker might be the one area where that probably doesn't apply because so much of their responsibility is there in the box. Like, where are you going to line another inside linebacker? Are you going to line him up as safety? Probably not. That wouldn't be a wise thing to do. But you have to have your defensive linemen being able to be interchangeable. And I think that's something that Zach Allen even mentioned. Like, Zach, just think about the different personnel options you can do, right? Let's say you're playing against a run-heavy team. I think the most run-heavy team we can think of right now when he comes back healthy, Nick Chubb, the Browns, that'll probably be a very run-first oriented offense. Or if you're playing the Baltimore Ravens, which the Broncos, unfortunately, will have to do that this upcoming season, they're going to have to play Lamar Jackson. They're going to have to play Derrick Henry. So when you need a beefier defensive line, you have guys, a multitude of guys right now on this roster that are bigger, that are bulkier, that you can put in there for those situations. Whereas I don't think the Broncos had the personnel to be able to adjust and do things like that last season, or maybe even 2 years ago. 2 years ago, you can make the argument, right? Especially when they came out with a 4-3 look against the Tennessee Titans, and they ended up holding Derrick Henry to, I think under 60 yards rushing, and they've had his number there. It's going to be hard when you introduce a guy like Lamar Jackson to the mix because your coverage responsibilities against the run change, especially on the outside there, versus just, okay, they're going to run the ball inside with Derrick Henry. He's going to get whatever he can. You have to account for that, and you have to account for the explosive plays outside. I think you add a guy like Tillman into the mix. You can mix and match your personnel with John Franklin Myers, Zach Allen, DJ Jones, Tillman. I mean, Angelo Blackson, who stood out in a big way. Like, you can get bulkier and bigger in situations that you need because you have guys who can cover that can help you maybe take away some of those matchups. So I think it gives Denver flexibility overall from a defensive scheme standpoint. This is certainly an interesting part in terms of the rotation. How does he fit into it? For me, I envision him playing in a rotational role right away. I mean, granted, he's got to come out and he's got to earn it, right? What he did in the UFL is tremendous. Come out during training camp practices, come out in a preseason and showcase why you made it to the NFL. And if you do that, then all of a sudden we're going to be sitting here talking about, hey, the Broncos scouting department might have just found a gem here. And now we're going to see maybe that translate into the regular season, maybe not as a starter, but as a rotational guy, which, to be honest with you, Denver needs that the most right now, more than anything. And we'll see how that kind of plays out. But you know what that means? Competition, and it's heating up even more at the defensive line with the addition of Dondrea Tillman. We're going to take a look at who Tillman has to hold off in training camp in the preseason if he looks to maintain and secure a spot on the 53-man roster when it's all said and done. You're going to get that much more here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of Locked On Broncos, it's brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook, and summertime is right around the corner. You know what summertime means, right? That means baseball. It means football season getting ready to start up. It means you have the Olympics going on. There is so much that you can bet all on FanDuel. And right now, new customers, when you sign up, get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. You sign up today as a brand new customer, place a $5 bet on anything, and it wins. You're automatically going to win $200 in bonus bets. Yes, that's right. That's $200 that you can use to bet on everything from who's going to win tonight's game in the Major League Baseball, or who's going to hit one out of the park when we talk about player stat lines, or you could even get involved in NFL futures. I always go through and predict who I think is going to win each division in a parlay. A little bit risky, but a lot of reward there overall. So that's what I get involved with on FanDuel. There's so many things you can get in terms of sports. Get inside the action. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. There's competition all across the board here for the Broncos as training camp approaches July 17th. The rookies will report. July 23rd, the veterans will report. And we assume July 24th is going to be the first open practice for Broncos fans to be able to be in attendance. That schedule is obviously going to be announced here in the next week or so. We anticipate next week. So keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll have you covered here on Locked On Broncos. Real quick, we just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. And as a reminder, as always, you can subscribe or follow if you haven't done so already on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get this show for free every single day, all year long. All right, sir, let's dive into the competition talk here. Now, obviously, we're just about a week, 2 weeks away from our training camp position previews officially kicking off. We'll focus on the offense first when we get to that, then the defense here. But we got to talk about competition right now because the Broncos made a move that signifies that, hey, they're looking to consistently get better in any way that they can. I'm a little curious to see what roster move, corresponding move happens when the signing of Tillman becomes official here for Denver. But overall, let's take a look at who is there right now. And obviously, this could change by the time this episode releases or whatnot. But if we're talking about the ability to play defensive tackle, defensive end, you look at where the Broncos are at right now. I'm looking at defensive end specifically. We know John Franklin Myers, Zach Allen, those two guys are the starters here for Denver. But for me, who are the competition to try to get into the rotation behind those two guys, right? You talk about 2 deep, maybe even 3 deep at those positions. Well, that's going to include Matt Henningsen. That's going to include Elijah Garcia, Jordan Jackson, and Angelo Blackson. But let's start off with Matt Henningsen. I mean, to be honest with you, Sayre, I forgot during OTAs and mandatory minicamp that Henningsen was really on the roster. And granted, look, you're not allowed to have physical contact during these practices. Training camp will be a little bit different. But it feels like the writing is on the wall. Like Matt Henningsen has a lot of pressure, I think, to compete and perform well in this period of training camp in the preseason if he wants to maintain his roster spot. The fact that the Broncos are adding a guy from the UFL, like if I'm those guys already on the roster, I'm saying, oh, no, this puts me on the spot here in training camp. I got to go and show out here. And it all starts with Matt Henningsen.
It does. And the last 2 years have really been Henningsen's audition to have a featured role on this team going forward. And so I think yes, this offseason matters. He could progress to a point, right, at which we're saying, all right, well, you can't cut Matt Henningsen. We could get to that point. in this offseason. But over the last 2 years, the Broncos have really needed somebody to step up on the defensive line. They've needed guys to come in there and provide what Henningsen had the opportunity to provide. It just hasn't happened. I mean, they've kept Elijah Garcia on ice for most of the last 2 years. I know he hasn't been there for a full 2 seasons yet, but Elijah Garcia, he was pretty much on ice last year. And we thought after the preseason last year, what we saw from him, like, man, this guy could be a factor. And then he just wasn't. It was just surprising. So to me, there's nobody on this roster on the defensive line that's, you could point to them and say, hey, that guy's fighting for a roster spot. There's nobody that right now I would say is clearly, oh, there's no way Dondrea Tillman's not getting that spot because that guy's there. I don't think there's anybody like that right now. Even if and when Yoma Uwazurike comes back in July as well, Cody, because that's another little wrinkle to be thrown into things. The Broncos could have cut him a long time ago, and he's been suspended for almost a full year. If and when he's reinstated, that's another little wrinkle that gets thrown into this whole situation here, because the Broncos can't afford to not go into the 2024 season with the right 53, including the right 6 or 7 guys on this defensive line.
No, you need that as well. And speaking of obviously that is coming up. I think the first or second week of July, we'll have some clarification. Maybe the Broncos hold up right here because you're right, Sarah. Like, they could have released him the moment he got suspended indefinitely by Roger Goodell. I imagine if Roger Goodell upholds the indefinite suspension, then I think that maybe the Broncos will move on at that point, right? Because there's nothing really that they can do. Now, we have seen Roger Goodell, kind of serve as a judge, jury, and executioner, so to speak. He's given several guys who have been suspended and were previously suspended indefinitely for gambling and whatnot. He's given them second chances. However, I feel like it is a little different for Innie because he actually bet on games that he was playing, and he actually bet on himself, which, look, we always say, like, players, you got to bet on yourself, but not in that way, not in the financial way. You can't do that. That's illegal. But you're going to have to factor him into it. And how does, like, if he does get reinstated, how does a year off of play where you're not able to be at the team facility, you're not able to talk to the coaches, you're not even able to be part of the playbook, or even they use a thing called teamworks. You're not able to be inside the system to learn the playbook. And look, it'd be a new defensive system for him to learn. So that is a huge obstacle for him. If I had to look at one guy on this list right now, and look, obviously I think Matt Henningsen has made strides there, but you need to see more from him going forward. I feel like veteran Angelo Blackson might be the one guy I'm going to say, hey, if you're going to go and you're going to keep too deep at defensive end, D-tackle type guys, Blackson was a guy who stood out to me during OTAs and minicamp in a big way. There's a reason they signed him. He got some opportunities to run with the first team defense. He might be the one guy that said, all right, I think it'll be John Franklin Myers, Zach Allen. I think Blackson's obviously the veteran stature. You're going to keep him on the roster this season. And then Tillman, I think, at that point. But it opens things up. And then there's Jordan Jackson. But regardless, Sarah, how training camp plays out and how these guys perform in the preseason, there are going to be opportunities for some of these guys to make the practice squad. I don't see that being a Henningsen. I don't see Henningsen being a practice squad player, considering, hey, he's played some rotational minutes the last couple of seasons in the NFL. You look at Elijah Garcia, a lot of room, like he was impressive, as you mentioned. Jordan Jackson, we don't quite know a lot of yet. So if I had to look at these list of 4 names that I'm talking about, it would seem like Jordan Jackson by name might just be the odd man out when we're looking at it on paper. Now, obviously, those circumstances can change. I like that Denver's in a position here, Sarah, and it feels like it hasn't been this way in quite some time, specifically on the defensive line, where it's like this could go either way, right? And if you have guys who could play multiple roles and satisfy what Jamar Cain is looking for, what Vance Joseph wants to do defensively in terms of his aggressiveness, Denver hasn't been in this position for a couple of years. So it's a question mark, but it's also an exciting one at that.
They definitely haven't been in this position for a while, because last year at this time, we were still talking about like Yoma Uwazurike was going to take over as a starter. And behind him, it was like, who even else is there? Is Jonathan Harris really going to start? And then he did. And so, that was the position the Broncos were in last year. Somebody that they didn't even give a restricted free agent tender to was starting at defensive end for this team. The upgrades cannot be overstated at this point. We talked about early in the offseason how critical it was to upgrade the defensive line, to get tougher on the defensive line, to raise the floor of that group, if I can continually beat that drum. And when you do that, you raise the entire floor of the team. When you have depth on the defensive line, when you win in the trenches, when you have the ability to control the line of scrimmage. Vance Joseph just talked about it at his lone off-season press availability, as far as I remember. He talked about winning at the line of scrimmage, and it was something that just plagued the Broncos all for the first 7 games for sure. And it's something that had to change this offseason. They had to get tougher and more physical and be able to raise that floor early on, because getting off to a hot start this season is going to be dependent upon whether or not that defensive line, that pass rush, can help this team stay in close games and close the close games out.
Yeah, and you can't be getting gashed like the way the Broncos did against, wide of the Raiders in the final game of the season. Luckily, you're not going to have to worry about Josh Jacobs, but, I mean, his apparent replacement ran all over the Broncos in the regular season finale last year. Let me go over really the Broncos' defensive line depth in totality, featuring defensive end, featuring defensive tackle here. We talked about DN designations. You look at the Broncos site, they've got Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers, Henningsen, all listed as defensive ends. They have guys like Angelo Blackson, Elijah Garcia, Jordan Jackson, who we've talked about, DJ Jones. And then they also have Malcolm Roach at defensive tackle, obviously a key offseason addition. His roster spot is not in question. He's going to be a rotational guy, D tackle. But they do have an undrafted rookie free agent out of UTSA and Brandon Matterson, who's 6'2", 295. And then they have one nose tackle designation, which is interesting, right? Because if you're going DN, DL, and then DT, nose tackle, I mean, essentially the same thing. So I don't know if that's a categorization error there, but Jordan Miller out of SMU, 6'3", 307 pounds, an undrafted rookie free agent, the guy that they can also look at on the defensive line. This is more so, I think those guys have better practice squad opportunities than maybe guys like Jordan Jackson or even Elijah Garcia. I don't think Elijah Garcia, if he were to somehow get released, I don't think he would be returning to Denver. I think another team would pick him up. But you know what? Like, that's the challenge here about trying to assemble a roster. Sean Payton has said that it's hard to figure out how to build the right 53-man roster without letting a player walk away that you're like, he's going to get signed by another team and he's going to ball. And you're like, man, we had him here. Why did we let him go? That is definitely something that keeps Sean Payton up at night. But you know what, Broncos country? Nothing keeps Sayre Bedinger and myself up at night except the fact that we get to bring you daily Broncos coverage every single day, all year long. We stay up because we're excited, not because we're worried about things. But thank you so much for making the show exactly what it is. That'll wrap up today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Tomorrow's episode, for all you everydayers out there, a little bit of a news roundup from around the Broncos, around the NFL. Lucas Kroll getting invited to George Kittle's tight end U. How big is that for a young guy in terms of giving him confidence? We'll highlight that and much more on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.